Hello and welcome to Gruntworks. I'm Brother Logan Isaac, broadcasting from Albany, Oregon. Today, in this episode, we're going to be discussing Cain and moral pain with Reverend David Peters, an Episcopal priest, former Army chaplain, former enlisted Marine, church planter, and David Peters is also the founder and prior of the Hospitallers of St. Martin. My community that I serve as the Director of Education, the Hospitallers of St. Martin, is an ecumenical, interfaith, monastic community within the Episcopal tradition that focuses on prayer, reconciliation, and hospitality for all those who have experienced war, poverty, and violence. This is part of the GruntGod Season Pass, which is an illumination, an expansion upon God is a Grunt and More Good News for GIs, which I released with Hachette in 2022. GruntGod Season Pass is me re-releasing it as a self-published book, which you can get from the website, pewhq.com. Just look for merch and search GruntGod. The Season Pass includes every chapter from God is a Grunt and More Good News for GIs, including ad-free podcast episodes and an icon that is unique to each chapter. Today's episode is on Cain and moral pain in my chapter, What Have We Done?, where I talk about Genesis and morality. I don't like using the word moral injury because we don't really have in the West and in the English-speaking West a robust construction or understanding of the moral person upon whom an injury might be inflicted. What do we mean when we talk about moral personhood? I don't think we have a really good account of what that means. And so I avoid using the word moral injury. I prefer using the word moral pain or combat stress instead of trauma, because within the military, it's difficult to admit weakness. It might endanger your job stability. It might endanger your personal relationships or professional relationships, which are the same thing. When you serve 24/7 beside your coworker, you're going to be friends too, whether you like it or not. And that's one of the things I really appreciated about military formation. And David is one of those people. David, back in, I want to say 2016, founded the Hospitallers of St. Martin with a Lutheran pastor, Lynn Smith Henry. And I didn't take vows until November of 2019. But what David has built and what David has done is just really incredible. He's written a number of books. One of the ones that we talk about in the episode is called Death Letter, Sex, War, and the American Experience. I can't remember what the subtitle is, but you should check that out. If you don't have it, you should get it through bookshop.org and support the Chapter House, which is Gruntworks' physical headquarters in Albany, Oregon. If you're in the area, you can come check it out. You can also find out more information at pewhq.com/bookstore. Support David by buying his books on bookshop.org and support Chapter House at the same time. In this chapter, we talk a little bit about, or I'll say, I don't want to say it's a trigger warning because I think it's a really good conversation, but it does include mentions of sex and violence. In particular, David makes this really incredible connection in the intimacy of both sex and violence and how we talk about it, but we don't want to talk about it. And soldiers and veterans live in that liminal space of knowing that they carry something that is supposed to be unseen. And Cain carries this mark. You'll see in the icon, it's a cross. And it looks like a wound, like something had hit him and it had scarred over. But it also makes me think of the ash cross that we take on our forehead on Ash Wednesday. And Cain represents to many Christian Americans a cautionary tale at best. And he's the first person who kills another human being. Abel, his brother, is the first person in the Bible to die. It's something nobody knows anything about within the story of the Bible. And it puts Cain in this really precarious position. But what I point out, and we talk a little bit about, is that Cain should not be just interpreted as a bad guy, as somebody we should not be like. Because almost every character in the Bible has something positive and constructive to tell us. Otherwise, the authors, the composers of the Bible wouldn't have included them. As a writer myself, and David is a writer and author, If we don't want you to learn something, we're just not going to include it. Everything that I put into God as a Grunt is there for a reason. Cain is there for a reason, a constructive, positivist reason. And I won't get into too much here, but I do hope you'll read the chapter. Go to pewpewhq.com/merch. Either buy the season pass, or you can get the chapters individually. You can search on the website for just this chapter on Cain and moral pain. And whenever you purchase it, you'll get the most up-to-date version of the ebook chapter. You'll get the icon. You'll get this episode downloadable without ads. But you can also listen to it with ads on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen. Right now, it's being uploaded with First Formation, my morning podcast for rank and file believers who want to get up and pray. But this may become the preseason for another flagship podcast for Gruntworks. It's not set in stone. It's just a vision, a dream right now, sparkle in my eye. But I think you'll really appreciate the conversation that two veterans are having about the first killer. He does it premeditatively, Cain does, but a lot of the violence that soldiers do is not premeditated. The only premeditation is happening somewhere up at federal or regional level, and we're just there to carry out orders. And it's up to us, often without any moral training, to make significant moral decisions at the heat of the moment. And that is a lot of weight to bear. And you'll see in Cain, in this icon, he's bearing a lot of weight. He's carrying moral pain that feels to him to be unresolved. But the hopeful element that we talk about in this episode is that that mark, that wound, is a mark, a signal of protection, that nobody should punish Cain. Nobody should force Cain away, because that is a divine mark of protection. And it's explicit in Genesis. And so I appreciate you listening. I hope you leave your thoughts and concerns in the comments on the podcast or wherever you listen, wherever you engage digitally. And of course, you're always welcome to head to pewpewhq.com and join the conversation there. But without further ado, here is Reverend David Peters and I talking about Cain and Genesis and moral pain. I hope you get as much out of listening to the conversation as I got discussing it with David myself. All right, so we're here to talk about Cain and moral pain. I'm talking with Reverend Father. Actually, I should have asked. Do you want me, should we be saying father or brother?
Brother's good, or David,
David. All right.
Logan.
I mentioned that because you're the prior of the Hospitallers of St. Martin, christiansoldiers.org, and I am the director of education for the Hospitallers. The Hospitallers are hosting GruntCon on October 25th, 2025. So, a little plug for the Hospitallers. David, it's great to have you. I'm going to jump right in and say I was really deliberate about using the language of moral pain, and I know that's coming right up to moral injury. And I don't need to get into why I have some nuances around moral injury, but I would really like to hear your work with moral injury and some of what you really want our listeners to hear when we talk about some of these subjects.
Yeah, it's a fascinating discovery, I think, if you could put that word on it, for me to find a word or concept that captures an experience I've had. And I think that is the goal of all discourse, science, study, even theology, to put a name on something that is a amorphous feeling or experience. It's never accurate 100% or perfect. No definition is. When we say I am this or I have this, there's always nuances to that. But to me, the concept of moral injury and moral pain in this case really does capture something that has not been really talked about in this way before. And I've just found it to be a helpful way of reading the Bible as well, to look at scripture through that lens of moral injury, of how people are experiencing the kind of suffering that comes from doing harm to others, sometimes in the line of duty, sometimes because of anger and rage, sometimes just not being able to do good things creates a sense of I'm not good anymore. And I've had that feeling a lot as a veteran coming home. I'm not good anymore. There's something wrong with me. And I felt that very palpably in weird situations where I knew cognitively that I was welcome and I belonged in a place and it was easy to just participate in something, but there was something that held me back and or kept me away and made me feel that I'm not good anymore feeling. So to
Yeah.
me, that's where moral injuries has helped me understand myself and others.
I suppose we should mention what can you define moral injury? I think I know I haven't kept up with the conversation, but could you say in just a couple words what you mean or what is meant in your understanding when we talk about moral injury?
Yeah, it's a wide ranging topic that originally started in a Jonathan Shea book. He's credited as the first person to use that term, and he uses it about Vietnam veterans and Greek mythical heroes in the Iliad who feel betrayed by their higher headquarters. In Vietnam, troops on the ground would call back for instructions. They'd be given instructions, and the instructions wouldn't fit their experience, and they would feel that betrayal that they weren't cared for. And the
You're
Greek
speaking of
soldier,
as Achilles in Vietnam and Odysseus in America in the 70s or early 80s. I don't remember.
he writes those in the 90s when he's
90s.
in bed with cancer and he's
Oh,
like
I didn't
reading
know
the Iliad in the original Greek, like you and I would do, Logan, if we were
that.
laid up in the hospital.
Yeah.
We pull out the Greek Iliad and we're reading.
I brought it on my honeymoon, actually.
I'm sure, yeah.
The Robert Fagles translation. I absolutely have
Oh,
it. Yeah, it's right there on the bookshelf.
not in the original Greek, though. That's really, that's for the
So
cancer ward.
Jonathan
But
Shea helps in the 90s. He helps Vietnam vets contextualize what had been called Vietnam syndrome. Before then, it was called shell shock. I pitched a book that's still in early manuscript form on the theological history of PTSD. And my concern, which I alluded to earlier, is if moral injury is just the same thing that we've been calling all these other things, let's get to the root of it. And when I was at Duke, I participated, or right before I came to Duke, I participated in the Truth Commission on Conscience and War with Rita Nakashima Brock and Gabriella Latini. And in the context of that, organizing that Truth Commission, which I did as an undergrad in Hawaii before I came to Duke, they had us take a class on truth commissions and the structure and the purpose and stuff. And I think that made me start asking questions as Brett Litz's article on moral injury became popularized. And so when I hear you say this realization, this which is it feels like it came to you, and maybe I should speak for myself. I certainly have been in a situation where I felt like in conversation or in community or even just in social transactions, I get the sense that people think I'm a threat, that they're afraid of me, even though like I'm loud and I'm pretty cishet, but that doesn't mean I've done anything wrong. And I articulate that because I used Cain, where I came to Genesis and began really digging into it after I had done some processing. I didn't really get into the Bible until after seminary, but it strikes me, and when I encounter Genesis and you have this darkness and this void that God comes to and speaks and creates effortlessly, the darkness to me feels like what we would call melancholia, which is also an old Spanish name for shell shock. And so for me as a vet coming to the Bible and seeing like melancholia, depression, nostalgia is another word for it, and God coming to us and introducing light and introducing order or reintroducing. And the other thing that for me was distinct from what I hear you describing, before I went to war, for some reason, I know the reason. My parents split up when I was 13. I began shoplifting and I got arrested. And then I was like, oh, I'm the bad guy because I literally, in handcuffs, I asked the officer, where do you want me to sit? In the front seat? And he said, no, the bad guy sit in the back. I was like, oh, I'm the bad guy. Now I'm white. It didn't stay on my record, but I that was what was introduced to me. And so going forward, I went to church because I thought it was the right thing to do. But when I entered the military, I was concerned with, am I a good person? Am I a good man? Am I a good soldier? And through Iraq, and when I came home, it was that it was I was constantly trying to prove or disprove that hypothesis instead of what I hear, and correct me if I'm wrong, introducing this problem of Logan or I, David, others are identifying in me a problem or a disorder. But for me, the context by circumstance was this internal hypothesis that other people are helping me to prove or disprove. And I wonder if that resonates with you, or if that, how do you come to Scripture, and what does Scripture do in relationship or in the context of other human beings that God has also created good?
Yeah, that is what we're, I think, always doing as humans, is trying to figure out where we fit in certain communities and in our own community and life. We're doing it unconsciously most of the time. We're not always asking about it or anything, but most of the Bible is about groups of people. There are, I'm trying to think of like stories of, we like adventure stories that have the lone wanderer
Yeah,
questing. And in modern film, it's like Star Wars classic Luke Skywalker's journey, but he's in
yeah,
community. And that's part of, you wouldn't have a movie. There are movies with just one person in them. They're very few. Most of
yeah,
them. So we're always part of that community. And scripture, I like what you said about Genesis. Genesis has always fascinated me because it's used as a bludgeon, as a tool to fight against science when the story
yeah,
of evolution. It's used as a prescription for human life. Even Jesus uses it that way when he says, when they come to him with questions about marriage and divorce, he says, look at Adam and Eve. They were one flesh and they shouldn't be separated. And
yeah.
people have always used that, the creation story about themselves. And I like what you said, that formless and void.
You
And
said
the,
it was a bludgeon. It's almost like apophatic, like I deserve a bludgeon. I'm speculating, but I bring up Genesis because in that questioning, I was thinking about getting out of the military as a CO after Iraq. I went to a New Testament history class, and that's when I really engaged with Scripture. And so I have this question. Genesis becomes an answer to my question. Am I a good person? That's how I was created. Am I going to fulfill that? And I say in the chapter on Cain and moral pain that if there's two things that are written into the source code of creation, it's togetherness and goodness. And evil, or it doesn't say evil early on, it says it is not good, it is not tov, to be bad. This Hebrew word meaning isolated, alone. And so evil, as we think of it, to me, is like it doesn't exist. It's like Augustine's privation. What we should be talking about is what is good, and are we orienting ourselves in that direction? But I want to hear more about, especially in Scripture, because the first part of GruntGod, or God is a Grunt, and more good news for GIs, I situate Scripture and individuals. Would you say more about how Genesis or the wider Bible influenced and informed your understanding, your faith journey as a veteran in particular?
yeah, I think that the question of that, the origin story for goodness is something that Christians have disagreed on for thousands of years too. Is humanity good? And there's enough evidence in the Bible and
Yeah,
other verses to say, no, we're not good
yeah,
inherently.
yeah,
But even the issues around what we call Calvinism today, of are we totally depraved, which some Calvinists don't think that means you're like all bad or anything. But we're always asking a question of, am I good? And in fact, I've heard it from so many people, usually when they do something terrible in a relationship, they'll say almost self-reflectively, I'm not a bad person. And then they'll say something bad they
but
did.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and that's about, is I think that's Aristotelian or some other philosopher. It's like your your actions are what determine whether you're good or not
yeah,
about what you feel or think. Now, the problem with religion, when you're raised in a religion, there's a lot of interrogation of thought, of whether you're having good thoughts or bad thoughts. And so you learn to like really privatize your thought
mm,
life so that no one
mm,
can probe in there and find out if you're good or bad. In fact, most humans have all kinds of thoughts all day long that we would consider bad and good happening simultaneously. Some of it's self-protective. I like what you said about the inherent creation. In the beginning, God said it was good.
yeah,
And the goodness of that is in the worth of it, like the worth of us as a person. I think that's the
Hmm.
road to suicide for a lot of us veterans
Yeah, yeah,
is that feeling of worthlessness. I can't think of a better word to capture.
yeah. Or I've heard of stories where people, typically men, their justification for ending their own life is, I'm trying to help my community. I'm trying to help my family. I'm a burden. Let's, it seems as though how we come to the Bible, nobody is reading the Bible at birth, but you inherit other people's interpretations and context through your parents, through your community. And it strikes me like if you're pretty self-sure, if you lack a certain humility, that seems in my mind to fit with that classification of Genesis as a bludgeon to correct behavior according to my standards and expectations. But if you come to a certain amount of humility, I think it was Alexander Campbell who said the circumference around a proper hermeneutic is, or a godly or virtuous hermeneutic is humility. You can't read the Bible without humility. And when you're actively wondering, if you go to the Bible with questions, it has answers or responses. And so that's why I was like, when I taught this Bible course from darkness to light about soldiers in scripture, Old and New Testament, and that's where I realized like the black ooze, melancholia, it's literally what it means in the Greek.
In your
And
body.
I can, yeah, and I can make all kinds of fun metaphysical theories about creation, but like the Bible for me is an answer to prayer. And if you don't know how to pray, if you don't know how to be humble and ask for things that you need that you don't have, or if you ask improperly, the Bible will not be as wholesome as a tool for you. Is that,
Yeah.
or am I being hard? And I also
Yeah,
want to know,
makes sense. And it's the tension of that is the trap of Genesis too. The
hmm,
trap of humanity is that we're created good. God says it's good. Lots of stuff is good. And then there's this like trap setup of the temptation.
yeah,
And and immediately, and I always ask people this, how long do you think Adam and Eve were in the garden before the events of this?
yeah, it
Now
doesn't
we're not
say.
talking like normal time and space,
Yeah,
story as it's
yeah,
told. Some people will say weeks, days,
yeah,
months, years, or they'll say 3 hours or 2 hours.
yeah,
Depending on how quickly, like when you have ice cream in the fridge or freezer, how quickly you eat it.
yeah.
For me, like I could probably stay in that garden 1 or 2 hours before I started
Yeah.
talking to the snake and whatnot.
Yeah.
Like, and the first baby they have immediately after
Yeah.
is Cain, who
He's born
murdered
into it.
his brother,
Yeah.
and so right in the story of goodness is all this other stuff that we see around us all the time in humanity. And to me, that's the tension of my inner life too. That my inner life is good. I am good. God created me this way, but I also have a lot of stuff in me that is not easy to put in that goodness box. And that's where the real story of Genesis, that as it's told, always counters the, and this is not to get, well, maybe looking at our cultural moment now, we're always, I don't know how to say this, but when it comes to the military, there's a problem in one part of the world. We shouldn't deploy the military there. We should send teachers. Now, that's the maybe liberal position of
Yeah.
the world is just a little sad because they're not educated enough. And then,
What I was in JBLM the other day to get ready for the conference, and right outside the military clothing store, there's these big posters, and the military, the Army does not call SF operators. It calls them advisors to this day. Come be is a recruiting poster for SF because First Special Forces Group is there, and one of the Ranger bats, I can't remember. And so, like, how we use language, how we play with language is a double-edged sword. An instrument can either be a weapon or a musical instrument. And so, like, how we use scripture is determined by our own original sin, whatever that might be, whatever inherited black ooze that kind of can get on our perception, our eyes, like scales. Before we go to a break, I wanted to get your sense of, do you think that military families, military service members, veterans, do you think that they, by merit of their service, and I have my answer to this, but I want to hear I'd like to hear you reflect on, does military service imbue people with a certain lens? And is that lens useful. I have my Marshall hermeneutic. I haven't proved it or put it out there, but I think that we do. But I'd really love to hear, especially also since you're not a commissioned officer, an ordained clergy person, like you get to see both sides of that. I'm wondering if there's what you think that what gifts might we be missing when we assign the name to our experiences as only pain or darkness.
Yeah, I think every Christian or even any person who's read the Bible for 2,000 years, not that they're all reading it at all those times, but who heard the story, just like when we see a movie, there's part of us that sort of puts ourselves in that story. I was in a hospital visit this yesterday with a very young person who was reflecting on Ignatius of Loyola with me about him putting himself in the story.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, that's right.
that's looking at it through the lens of our experience. I don't think we can look at anything without that lens. And that lens, and as long as we don't claim that's the only way to read the Bible or something, I think it's good to look at it through your lens. And that's where we learn actually things that we probably didn't know about the Bible. That's why if you read a commentary on Genesis from 200 years ago, you will find really true, wonderful things in almost
Yeah,
any commentary of Genesis, except for
yeah.
maybe some really awful ones. But you also miss a lot of stuff that you might need for your modern life today, because 200 years ago, there were different issues that people were experiencing and those commentaries were addressing. So I think it's always true. And military families, people with military experience, veterans, however we categorize us, should bring that experience to scripture. And you're doing
Yeah.
that. That's we're doing it.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that Ignatius and Spiritual Fitness is one of the chapters in GruntGod in part two on tradition. And now that we've talked about lens, when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about this icon of Cain that I created with the help of AI. I commissioned from AI. So stick around, listen to a couple ads, or skip through them, and we'll be right back with Brother David Peters. All right, we're back with Brother David Peters, author of several books. You should check out at bookshop.com, buy his books, and support independent booksellers. David, I'm just going to jump right into the Cain icon because this is one of the first icons that I like commissioned with AI after I figured things out. And here you'll see Cain is downtrodden. You can't see his pupils. Some of the things that stick out to me, he's carrying a shovel because he is told by God that the ground has cursed him and he's going to have to toil. And one of my favorite things is like, in which I talk about in God is a Grunt and More Good News for GIs, the ground throws some dark humor in there. Oh, you think your brother is compost? Okay, you're going to have to work for your food now. And so he's carrying this soil, and there is no bottom half of him. He is in the ground. And so he's cursed from the ground that he had messed with. And you'll see by the shovel, there's a star with kind of a badge. And that's, to me, a reflection of the dual tasks of humanity that Cain just forewent. And he disclaimed any responsibility to protect and serve, which we get into in the Joshua chapter. I'm interviewing Tobias Winwright on just policing and Joshua, the military commander. But here you see it's on the ground and there's little pieces missing because he said, am I really my brother's Shemar, my brother's keeper, protector? And he left out the odd, which means work or toil or till. And his halo is cracked. His halo to me looks like a cut down tree. Cain, the first of humanity, is a cut down tree. Before he could reach his full stature, he's been cut down. And even the wood is beginning to crack on his halo. And you can see dark shadows behind him. And finally, the just cross, you can't quite tell if it's a wound on his forehead or I remember like we burn trees. They are fuel for our fires and what keep us warm. And so it's not an ash cross, but it is a cross as his head is backgrounded with a cut down tree. Would you like me to leave that up or have
Ah,
you seen enough of the
yeah, I have. Yeah,
melancholia and dark
yeah,
void?
yeah. The ground, driven from the ground, the man who has cultivated the plants and grown them and is, yeah, not,
Yeah. His offering was of the first fruits of the ground, whereas Abel's offering was the fatlings of the flock.
Yeah. Maybe we should just tell the story real quickly of Cain and Abel because not everybody's up on Bible stories.
Hit me with it.
Adam and Eve, right after they leave the Garden of Eden, it says that Adam knew his wife, a sexual euphemism,
Oh, yeah.
and she conceived the first time. And that's Cain. And Cain is born. She says, I've gotten a man from the Lord, which is a funny thing to say because he's a baby,
Yeah.
but maybe just male. I got a male because that's the first thing you look at when the baby comes out. It's a little man came out of me. That's in the story of the innocence of Adam and Eve being lost, the awareness of their reproductive issues and pain and suffering, all that comes into that story. And then Cain becomes a tiller of the soil, cultivating
Well,
crops.
before that, they did not know each other until after they are kicked out. Is that, I want to double check. I think that's the case. And we now have a culture that I love the language of sex positivity because it reorients just because it happened after the fall does not make it bad. Even though we as humanity fell, we cannot be recreated to be bad. I've big issues with original sin if it means that we are born out of the womb bad. I think that rewrites the story. But we do not conceive, and the man, at least, who's typically thought to expected to climax in order to produce children, that is only seen and narrated after the fall. And so that's one of the things I pick up on. I didn't realize, like, even Cain knew his wife after he goes to nod or whatever. And
Yeah.
you're right, it's a sexual euphemism. Anyway, I want you to pick back
Oh,
up
that's
where you
a good
left
one.
off. Sorry.
Yeah. And even the Adam and Eve's temptation, eating the fruit, has sexual overtones. Their nakedness is exposed and
Yeah.
the loss of innocence. And that is the human story and it's true for violence and sex. To me, they're flip
Mm.
sides of the coin. You grow up in a sense of innocence. So that's why most people say the world used to be good. Now it's bad. You were a kid.
And you have a book on that, don't you?
I think maybe post traumatic God, something like that.
I thought you had one on, let
Oh,
me
God,
check.
sex, and war.
Death Letter, God,
Oh,
Sex,
yeah.
and War. Check that out
Yeah.
at bookshop.org. Listeners, thank you.
Yeah. And so this loss of innocence, and it's true, you grow up and then you find out about your own sexuality. Suddenly it's revealed to you, usually it's through
Yeah.
some strange experience that you have.
Yeah.
And then you're not innocent anymore. You hide this part of yourself.
Yeah.
You know, if you're masturbating, you're like keeping that on the DL. And you think you're
Yeah.
the only one to ever do it. And you wonder, am I good or am I bad? It
Yeah.
feels good. But
It has this awesome lyric like the first time, what is it? But basically, the first time you orgasm, and he's talking in terms of Genesis, is this bad? Is it bad? And it's not supposed to be. And yet we've accumulated this corruption or darkness, and we forget like that's not how we were made. But yeah, no, anyway.
yeah, and that's so true. And it's the human experience. And then violence is not the same as sex, but it has that same forbidden quality to it, or
Yeah.
it has
An
to be
intimacy.
confined, intimacy. We want to make sure we're not just everybody's doing it with everybody,
Yeah.
violence
Yeah.
or sex. Every culture has taboos around violence and sex that are hard to explain. And they go very deep into the culture that almost without explanation. Of course, you wouldn't have sex with your sister, we would say
Yeah.
point blank. And the revulsion from that, the taboo of that is similar to taboo of violence because it is
Yeah.
violence, even though it's a whole different thing. So sex and violence have that same taboo quality. And Cain is the first child born into this world of his parents who are now awake and aware and are wearing clothing and are struggling.
Woke. Yeah, it's a difficult metaphor, but yeah, their eyes have been opened. Like, I always think of the original sin not being murder, but when you eat the fruit, it doesn't matter what happens magically out in the universe. It's like, I now believe I have knowledge because I've been told that this thing is the tree of knowledge. And your synapses and everything are exactly the same, but that's where arrogance comes in. That's why I think humility is the cardinal virtue and pride or arrogance is the cardinal sin because everything that follows seems to rely on the assumption that I don't need to consider other people. I don't need to consider God. I am capable of making a moral decision in isolation, all by myself.
Yeah, it's so isolating. And anyway, so Cain is born. He has a brother that follows shortly after. It says Cain tills the ground, grows crops, and then his brother is a sheep herder, goat herder. So he's taking care of animals. And that does have historical or anthropological, archaeological
Yeah.
connotations. Farmers
Nomads versus
versus
sedentary.
nomads
Yeah.
and all that, but they're in the same family, which is we
Yeah.
should remind ourselves that humans, we've always been in the same family.
Mm.
So all acts of violence are fratricide, brother against brother, like all
Yeah.
of them, including the people we don't know in every war and everything, which is the great horror or scandal of wars when you discover that the people you're killing are a lot like you
They
when
have
they've told you
families, they
they're
have
not like
kids.
you.
Yeah.
That's the anyway. So it says they are called to go sacrifice. There's no criteria for the sacrifice given that is in the
Yeah. He just
scripture.
kind of he like improvises.
And Cain, the older brother, brings the crops he's grown. Abel, the younger brother, brings the lamb that he's raised. And they offer these to God in some kind of burnt offering to God. And God is pleased with Abel's offering, the blood sacrifice of the animal. And God is displeased with the sacrifice of Cain. Now, you could debate all day of, hey, he wasn't told, but neither Adam and Eve weren't told everything either in the garden.
Yeah.
But so you could argue they were told things through Adam and Eve. But anyway, because of this anger and jealousy, we might call it, or envy of Cain for Abel's acceptance by God, Abel's goodness, Cain kills his brother. It says he takes him, I have the language here, but he says Cain was angry, and Cain was angry the minute the sacrifice was not accepted. God looked with favor on Abel. He looked with disfavor on Cain, and Cain became angry. His face was downcast. Cain says to his brother, "Let's go out to the field." While they're in the field, Cain attacks his brother and kills him.
Premeditated. Yeah.
That's important to the story.
Yeah.
It's not murder fully in an American legal system unless you had some premeditation to violence or something. And
Yeah.
so we see the first child born in the world kills his own brother. And we can say he didn't know that was going to happen, maybe. We don't, it's a mystery.
Yeah.
But
Nobody's died yet in the story. Yeah. Yeah.
ultimately, the result is the same. And God has this conversation with Cain, which is nice in some
Yeah.
ways. Like, have this,
It's not a fun conversation, but yeah, God comes to Cain.
yeah. And this is where he says, "Where is your brother Abel?"
Yeah.
And then Cain's answer is a classic. It's a zinger we still use. Am I my brother's
Yeah.
keeper? And
None of my business. Yeah.
then
Gosh.
this curse is put on him. That's where the mark is put on him that protects him. The mark, and you have as a cross. I like that.
Yeah. How do you take the mark? There's a book that helped me situate the mark of Cain. I'm looking for it on myself. I can't find it offhand, but there's a whole like literary cycle history with the mark of Cain, whether it's horns and like his children mistook him for an animal in the forest and hunted him, or whether it's like rays of light, like Moses, because we'll get to Moses in the next chapter, but like how do you read the mark? I know in God is a Grunt, I say like it's a mark of protection because God is pretty clear, I think. I was raised I was raised to think it was a form of humiliation. Everybody sees it, and that's how Cain seems to interpret it. But they will see me and do to me what I did to my brother. But Cain says, or God says, no, no one will touch you. And the unspoken implication is like, even you're protected from yourself. If soldiers are turned to Cain to understand what it means to have killed someone, meditatedly or not, like we could say that mark is shame, but we could also interpret it a double-edged sword. The same difference is saying, God's no, you're not, no one's going to harm you. They'll know that you have my protection. And hopefully you understand, Cain, also, I am protecting you. And that duality, I'm wondering if what were you raised to think of as the mark of Cain, and what do you think is a Is that different from how you see it now? And if not, how do you run that through your head?
Yeah, I agree with you in that it is a protection. When I was in Iraq, a soldier, one of my soldiers shot somebody and killed him. And he was in a guard tower. Somebody shot at him. He shot back
Mm,
and the guy died. They went out there to the building and they found the dead body of this person that had shot. And that was the end of the story.
yeah,
Everyone, and this guy came to talk to me, he said, everyone was congratulating me on the shot. And I was actually
yeah,
jealous
yeah,
as a
yeah.
chaplain with no gun. I was like, wow, man, I could have done something like that maybe. Wow, this guy's. But then he said, he got real quiet and he said, I don't know. I don't know why they were congratulating me.
Hmm.
I feel like I crossed a line or something, he said. He mumbled that out like in a,
How old was this guy?
yeah, soldier's age, 20s
Well,
probably.
I guess what rank
Yeah.
maybe?
A
19, 20?
specialist, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know his age, and I
I
wouldn't share it anyway because of the time and date and stamp.
Yeah. I
There's
think he really didn't. I was 22 or 20. I turned 23 in Iraq. And if somebody had congratulated me, I would have known immediately, like that fits in infantry culture. And it wouldn't have been, no, I'll speak as myself. In Iraq, I was like, I'm trying to be a good person. How do I do that? And I got like people that my unit didn't like it when they learned that I didn't fire in return during an ambush, but tactically that was actually called for. Anyway, him saying, I don't know why they congratulated me feels off. And that's why I
yeah,
asked is
yeah,
a
and I'm probably misquoting him,
okay.
paraphrasing of the, I don't know why they did that, or I don't, more of I don't
Hmm.
like it. So
Okay.
similar to when I came back from Iraq and went through the Dallas airport, everyone was cheering. There was this big
Oh
group of
yeah,
people
yeah.
cheering, and I thought, like, why are they cheering? That was my first initial thought.
Huh.
They shouldn't be cheering for me, for us. That was the shame part of it. Like
Yeah.
this guy was sharing it with me, the sort of maternal figure in the unit, so that he probably was pretty happy that his friends were congratulating him on
Yeah.
some level.
Yeah.
But there was some, and that was where and I didn't know what to say to him. And I just listened. I didn't say, you're just doing your job kind of thing, although that is a true answer.
Yeah.
And it's that idea of Cain, because he's done this thing to his brother. And what this soldier did is not the same thing as Cain morally, we would legally, and all these different
Yeah.
things. But the essential issue
The
of it is
essence
what
is there.
the Civil War veterans would call seeing the elephant. They would
Hmm.
have this, they'd train, they'd march around, they'd shoot their guns. But until you're in a battle, you didn't see the elephant. And then you saw the
Interesting.
elephant. And that it's same with the
Hmm.
sex thing in the garden and Adam and Eve. Like there's thinking about sex and then there's the experience. There's thinking
Yeah.
about violence, which we think about violence all the time. We think about sex all the time.
Yeah.
But the experience of it is the real thing. And it's after that experience, and that's where I think that now they know good and evil. Now they've had
Yeah.
the
They
experience.
know.
It's a knowing that we always say, I wish I didn't know that about that celebrity when they get do
Oh,
something, or,
yeah.
I wish I could unsee that. That we talk about with trauma a lot. So this protective mark of Cain is, to me, it has something to do with the image of God too, or
Hmm.
God's presence, in that this guy belongs to God. Don't do anything to him. And the truth is, all of us look like God. Are in the image of God.
Yeah.
So the problem
We
with
bear
killing,
the essence of God, just like the essence of killing and the essence of sex. Yeah. I don't want to interrupt. I think you're on a very important tangent. I want you to
I know
finish.
one last thing of the problem with murder is that it destroys the image of God in
Hmm.
another person's life that God
Yeah.
made. That seems to be the problem of Cain and Abel, of killing Abel, and so that protective mark seems to me to be like, and I think a cross would be a beautiful sort of retroactive
Yeah.
moment, that, a symbol on his head. Or the name of God, which these are in the story pre-literate people, maybe,
Yeah.
but or something else that we don't even can't even conceive of, or maybe just the face of God, which that's another thing I don't even know. But there is a face of God talked about in the Bible.
Yeah.
His
Yeah.
hinder parts and
There's something in that knowing an experience. Like it's a sexual euphemism, but it's also, I have not killed, or to my knowledge. I was an artilleryman. I did a lot of artillery. I probably did, but I do not know. I do not know. And I think within military and veteran culture, like that is a real thing. And I wonder if the mark of God, maybe it isn't like an actual like symbol. I talk about in the book how typos and stereotypes and cliches, tropos, they're like embedded. It's like embossing on someone's soul. If you destroy a soul, an image of God, that sits with you. You carry it. And people who know, who have heard the truth of your experience, which might include having killed another human being and being in fear of that mark. And yet also the distance that it creates can be both a bad thing and a good thing. The bad thing being like the togetherness is broken down and you need to restore that somehow. And yet that isolation to preserve the taboo, to preserve the essence or the dignity or the likeness of God in that soul that is no longer here. It's like a both and. I love that knowing. And I'll close with the conscience and conscientious objector. I learned the Latin literally means like with knowledge. You can't pretend you don't know, except with like mental illness and dementia and Alzheimer's at the end of life. You can't say you don't know. Once you know, it's there and it's there for good. It's a mark. But yeah, the not conflation, but the intermixing with sex, I think is really, yeah, it's really important element that I didn't get into in God is a Grunt. And I hope people pick up your book, Death Letter, God, Sex, and War at bookshop.org. David, do you have anything left that you want to share with our listeners before we call it in and shut it
Yeah.
down?
Just, I don't always like my face. And as I get older, I look at my face and I say, I'm looking old. Or our faces are, but in warfare, since the dawn of time, people have been changing their faces to paint them, to put big
Oh,
hats on, helmets, face mask. We wore
yeah.
glass in Iraq. Like you do all these things to so that image is not there, which I don't know if the face is the ultimate
Hmm.
image of God, but it seems like there's something to that because Jesus even uses that example with the coin, which has a face on it. You
Hmm.
know, whose image is on the coin?
Yeah.
You
Dang.
read. So there's something about our faces that are part of that like beauty of humanity that we experience relationship in. I think maybe for me just to say like whenever I feel shame, I've got to say, you know, my face is like looking at God and God's looking at me. And God's not ashamed of me. No matter
Hmm.
what I've been through or what I've done or feel or anything like that, the truth of life is that God is looking at me. God's favor is looking at me and I'm looking at God. And when I look at God, the other stuff kind of gets a
Yeah.
lot better.
And that was Cain's fear. He's like, I will be driven from your face. I will not be in your presence. And God argues back, which suggests no, there's nowhere you can go where you won't find me. And some in the Vietnam generation, like, rightly believe like God is not in war. And I don't know. It's hard for me to accept that. And I don't think I do. But I absolutely see where, like, how could God be in all this? But man, it's good. God is not ashamed of you. If anything, if you need a mark, you write it on your forehead. God, you're not alone. God is not ashamed of you. David, thanks for taking your time. I love it. Thanks for being with us. If you want to learn more about him, you can Google him, Reverend David Peters, and get any number of his incredible books at bookshop.com. This has been Logan Isaac and David Peters for the first installment of the GruntGod Season Pass. Thank you for listening. Thank you, David, for being here with me. Any last words?
Just, I love you all and I love you, Logan. Thank you for being my friend through all this. Thank you.
Thank you.